Hey, you are about to experience one gnarly podcast. It was, but also, and it did make me feel, yeah. But we thought it was important that we go through this journey together. But before we let you in to our quantum entanglement of the minds, we wanted to tell you about some shows that we got coming up so you can come see us live in the flesh and be with us energetically. So, Sarah, tell us about the shows.
October 19th, we have a show in Burlington, Vermont. November 1st, we are coming inside of you, New York City. And then November 15th and November 16th, we will be in Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, it's going to be a little East Coast tour. So go to the show notes, look below. There will be information and links to all of our shows. And this particular podcast is sponsored by
the Galactic Federation.
And our hair, just like fluffy hair that's been blown in the wind, because no one's giving us money to do that. But hopefully you will give us money to do this. And so we have a Patreon. It is also in the show notes below. You can click on the Patreon and you'll see all these tiers and things that we offer to you, our bodies, our souls, our minds, our spirits, our essences.
Yeah, I mean, tiers is in subscription tiers, but maybe we'll also see our literal blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah. This is the labia of love.
It is.
All right. So thank you so much.
Enjoy the
what
episode.
You think. Yeah. Ooh, we're ready.
Or just like have whatever experience you want. You don't actually have to enjoy it.
No, but just listen till the end.
And if you want to join us in the conversation, the best way to do that is through our Patreon. So,
yeah. Welcome to the Gnarly Girls podcast.
What's up, gnarly beings?
This is a loose-lipped, unfiltered, raw dogging, stripping down of culture.
No fucks, no panties. This is a labia of love.
We're your hosts, Tony Naj
and Serafina Supernova, and this is Gnarly Girls.
Welcome to the Gnarly Girls podcast. We're gonna get gnarly, talk about some gnarly stuff. I'm Tony Naj.
And I'm Serafina Supernova.
Okay, so I want to talk about a personal experience I have had with this whole conversation around the P. Diddy parties. And I think it's really important that we also discuss how race is intimately connected to this story. So are you down to hear my story?
Super down.
Okay, so when I was 23 years old, I was asked to be a VIP liaison for a hip hop convention that was happening in Puerto Rico. So when you hear VIP liaison, do you think I was hired to be a prostitute? I mean, it's like, wait, do you?
I mean, yeah.
So let me just be clear. When I heard that at 23 years old, I just graduated college, I felt that that was a very important title.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking that there was going to be any sexual favors connected to being a VIP liaison. I thought that meant I was going to be really trusted around quote unquote very important people in hip hop. And to be clear, hip hop was a huge part of my heart, of my soul, of my essence. It was the music I listened to growing up. I was very connected. So I thought I was very professional when I was asked to be responsible for VIPs.
Yeah.
All right, so I get down to Puerto Rico, and I think that the VIPs that I'm going to be dealing with at this hip hop convention are the artists, like Snoop Dogg, Little John, all those performers. Like that's who I thought the VIPs were. But in truth, the actual VIPs were the white executives that owned the record labels. So that was who I was assigned to. And I was very disappointed because I wanted to hang out with the artists. I was like, what? The executives, like the old men with the white hair, like what the fuck? I was not pumped. So fast forward a couple days, it's the last night, there's a big concert, there's a big party, and the other VIP liaison and I, her name was Lindsay, and she was very pretty. She looked like Snow White. She had a princess kind of essence to her, and I looked like me, like hair disheveled, smelled like a cumin perhaps, maybe some turmeric, definitely armpit hair, definitely leg hair. But like, still 23. So
And you're very pretty.
thank y'all. But my point was is that Lindsay had a je ne sais quoi in essence to her. So at around 11:30 at night, Lindsay and I got summoned to one of the executives' home or like apartment in the hotel to bring them Moe. And we were already in our jammas. We were ready to go to bed. And we were like, oh, okay. So we got dressed and we go and we bring them away because and then we're also like, why can't room service to bring them the Moe? But we were asked to do it. It was our job. So we were taking our job very seriously. So we like went and we delivered them away. And the executive took one look at Lindsay, who I now remember he had specifically asked for. He requested her. And he said, I will be taking this one to my hot tub and kind of just like ushered me off. So I was then stuck with this executive's brother who was quite schlubby. Like the executive, he did have an executive essence to him. He had, nice clothes and the hair, and it was his suite. And then his brother was just like a total dorfus. And that is a word that I think everyone can understand. So I'm with this 40-something-year-old man, and I'm like, what? And also, was it clear to me what was going to happen to this girl in the hot tub? Definitely not, because I'm still young. I still had friends that were guys. It was still in my consciousness that, like, oh, yeah, you could just go into a hot tub with a guy and like hang out, drink a couple beers, maybe, hey, just enjoy your life with this guy. It wasn't clear to me what was happening. So I go with this brother and I'm like, we'll want to go to the beach because we're in Puerto Rico and we're on this like amazing sweet area. So I'm like, let's go to the beach and go swimming because that's the kind of thing I do. So we get to the beach and then I realize, wait, I'm not going to take off my clothes in front of this random man. So I'll just swim in my clothes. So I just went swimming in my clothes because I was in Puerto Rico. I was excited. I'd never been there before. And this executive's brother was just watching me swim in my clothes, probably for a half an hour. It wasn't like a hot, sexy, like, I'm just going to dip in and then dip out. Like, I had played in the water like a dolphin for a half an hour, 45 minutes, because that's how I swim. So he had to wait quite some time. Then I finally come out and either I had the joint or he had the joint, but somehow weed was smoked. And I'm just like looking at the moon, talking about aliens, as one tends to do, just going on and on about like intergalactic dimensions and parallel universes. I was just, very into what I was saying. And then all of a sudden, this brother attacked me. He just pounced on me. There wasn't a seduction involved. There wasn't even an effort to like touch my knee or caress a face or something. He was just immediately on top of me. And because I was stoned, you know how when you're stoned, you sometimes just externalize all your thoughts and you don't really know how to keep them in. So I immediately said, stop graping me. And he was like, what? And I was like, you're graping me. And he was like, shut up. And now we're full on wrestling on the beach. And I think the weed really did help me recognize that this was not okay because I was so high and there was no bedside manner about him. There, again, the lack of seduction and the full attack made it so I kept being like, you're graping me, you're graping me. And he was like, shut up, bitch. And then I threw sand in his eyes because I was on a beach and sand was there. This made him very mad. But I was also very mad because he had attacked me. So then I'm like, I'm telling your brother what you did, thinking that his brother would care. So then I'm like marching back up to the suite, and the guy's behind me, and he's like screaming at me. And I'm like, shut up. I'm yelling back at him. I don't know why this was like my reaction, because to be clear, I've had a lot of other gravy moments, but again, they were less like attacky. So I think I was like, oh, I'll just let this gravy thing happen. This one, it was just too attacky for me not to react. So I get back to the suite and I'm like, hey, like knocking on the door, being, your brother tried to grape me. And then the executive comes out and he's like in the bathrobe and Lindsay's in a bathrobe. And I'm like, what the hell, dude? Your brother's a Graybo. And he's like, get the hell out of here. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Your brother's the Graybo. He was like, get the hell out. So they kicked us out. I'm still stoned. So I'm like, whoa, Lindsay, what was that? What happened? And it didn't even occur to me that anything happened to her at that moment because she was in a bathrobe and she seemed quite relaxed, but anything could have happened to her. Anything could have happened to her. And maybe she wasn't relaxed at all. Maybe she was in total shock. And I was just taking up a lot of oxygen at that moment with being like, that dude was such a rapist. Like, what is happening? So I kind of forgot about that whole event. And then a couple years later, I was at this party in New York. It was kind of a fancy pants party that this director had brought me to. Long story long, this is almost done. I ran into the executive and his wife at this fancy party. It was on Gramercy Park, like all these Richie Richardsons were there. And I was like, oh, hey, I know you. And he was like, no, you don't. I was like, yeah, I do. I met you in Puerto Rico. And he was like, no. And then I was like, oh, okay. And I just let it go. And I tell this story because it's like we're talking about P. Diddy, we're talking about these artists, we're talking about these actors, we're talking about Hollywood, but the executives that run Hollywood and that run the music industry, and I think we all are, getting hip to the idea like it is a culture. But the fact that this brother just thought I was there for him, it didn't even occur to him that I wasn't a body for him to do whatever he wanted with. And it didn't occur to him that I would have any other reaction but to acquiesce. And that's why I think race is such a huge part of this conversation because I want these white executives to also be a part of this, like all the people that own the people. So, all right, what do you think about all that?
Gives a whole new definition to Mr. Sandman. I just want to first of all, the sand in the eyes was such a good move.
Yeah, that was.
Like primal body reaction. I think that, I've heard some of your other Grapey stories, and I think something that strikes me as a common thread of Grapey situations is the sense of entitlement required in order to grape. And this one feels like it's at like a really high level of the entitlement and like how the aggression and the entitlement come into play when it comes to the way the grapiness happens. I also think that it's not a coincidence that all of this stuff about these artists in Hollywood is coming forward right now, right before the election, to distract from the fact that Donald Trump himself is a rapist.
Okay, well, if we're going to bring in the election and the timing, I genuinely think that this is a threat. Like by taking down Diddy, I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about Diddy had that vodka company and Ciroc, and then he was suing the vodka company, and the fact that Diddy did that was his great um like it was the catalyst to being taken down. Because I guess the point of my story, and the point I think a lot of people are making, is that the FBI wasn't just like, wait, what? Oh, we're just hearing of this. Let's immediately act. No, this has been something that has been talked about. There's jokes about it in The Simpsons, these white parties. Like this has been in the collective consciousness for truly decades. People have been discussing this. So the fact that the FBI is acting now, I believe, is showing, and this is just again my personal thought, is showing how powerful and how easy it is to take someone down. And as we all know, there is the current war machine effort that's happening. Okay, so if we're going to talk about Hollywood, if we're going to talk about executives, we have to talk about politicians. And this is where a lot of people bristle. People don't like that.
Yeah, like if you think these Hollywood folks are up to no good, it's like we haven't even gotten to the politicians yet.
So if we're going to talk about the politicians, I do have another story.
I love that.
Are you
Please.
down for another
Oh my
story?
gosh, I'm down like Donkey Town.
Okay, so again, I understand no one wants to think of our politicians engaging in this kind of activity. That makes perfect sense. I did not want to think that. That wasn't like something I was like, oh, I love this thought. I feel so safe in my body now. But this information came to me at around 2004. And what was happening in 2004 was baby Bush was just about to win his second presidency. And as far as I was concerned, baby Bush, that election that happened was completely illegitimate because you had Diebold, you had the hanging chads. This was the beginning of the conversation of like internet conspiracies. It was very left wing. I need to really make that clear. Internet conspiracies began as a left wing progressive movement. And I know it's been co opted by the quote unquote alt right, but that was not what was going on in the early 2000s because we were under a Republican presidency.
Yeah.
9/11 was a Republican presidency. The first genuine, like, internet conspiracy was the 9/11 truth movement. And that was a huge community, again, of leftist, progressive, anti-racist, feminist, revolutionary, anarchist type of people. So it hurts me. It hurts me how people are like, oh, conspiracy, as if that's a dirty word, because it began for me in my youth as questioning authority. And the authority was a conservative government. So I don't know, that's relevant. I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's majority white people who think that they know everything that critique conspiracy as alt-right because they want to align themselves with quote unquote progressive values, but they haven't actually arrived at the self-realization and the intimacy with self and like the deep, like earth-shaking, like reality check of how much violence there is in the world that is required to actually hold many truths at one time. Like, yeah, sure, there are a lot of conspiracies aligned with alt-right ideas, but as you're saying, that's not where questioning the system started. And I actually think it's incredibly intentional that the media makes it seem like the alt-right is the group that has conspiracy theories when actually it's the deeply progressive activists on the front line who are willing to put their reputation on the line. That's what's happening here if you're just not aware of what's happening. And their safety on the line and their brand on the line. Because you talk about these things, you get censored. I just saw you post on your stories yesterday how many community violations that you have on your page, and same. And then you made a point about like ex-government people starting to be a part of the censoring of social media, and how, I mean, I've at least personally seen this in the last 6 months, how much censorship has just ramped up.
Yeah.
And that's not the conservative agenda. The censorship on social media is not a conservative agenda.
It's a political agenda.
It's a political agenda.
It's a bipartisan effort to censor us and to keep, I mean, this is another kind of thinking I have, and then I want to get back to the story, is the oversaturation of quote unquote conspiracy is the ultimate conspiracy. So what I think happened is that you had this 9/11 truth movement that really was a movement. And questioning 9/11, it wasn't just like, oh, it wasn't just people being contrary. It was people wondering how far the government would go in order to pursue an economic agenda in their foreign policy to justify war efforts. And I think we've all seen in history that many governments will sacrifice their own people in order to create a scenario or in order to create a frenzy where then a war is quote unquote justified. And this is a ancient practice that began with the Greeks 2,500 years ago, because the plays that the Greeks would produce were mandatory. Not only did citizens have to go, the men, but the slaves had to go, the women had to go, the children had to go. These were compulsory artistic events, and they would all watch these plays and then get so emotionally worked up. And that was how the Greeks manipulated the populace to continue war efforts that were only benefiting the wealthy, because they needed those bodies. They needed the bodies of the men. They needed the bodies of the women to support the bodies of the men to go and fight their wars for their empire growth. So this is a strategy that is millennia year old, the manipulation of media to make people collectively crazed in order to go to war often. I mean, that's really one of the main agendas. And like the war machine that I go on and on and on about in my videos in my life that I've been talking about for, for so long, this is not new. This is again, like I'm saying, this is the empire that has been going on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and the power structure changes hands slightly. But yeah, so I guess where I wanted to tell this other story about the political and the whole grape culture that is part of this, which is, we're talking about two things here, right? We're talking about Diddy and we're talking about politics. And why are we connecting the two? Because I personally think that this current war effort, which the majority of Americans do not support, people do not want to go into the army right now to continue this war. I mean, you can look at the statistics yourself, research it. This is not, the population of the United States does not want to continue funding these multiple wars that we're involved in. And I believe that part of the conversation around Diddy was showing politicians that if you try to go against our war agenda, if you attempt to go against our war agenda, we're going to take you down. And how are we going to take you down? Because what's happening at Diddy parties is also what's happening in political parties. And nobody wants to see that.
Yeah.
Because that's horrendous to say, and it's horrendous to think, and it's horrendous to believe. But let's just do a thought experiment. And I'm telling you about like my initiation into this because I'm a progressive person and I was initiated during a right wing or Republican power structure. So I understand that now we've had this like quote unquote democratic power structure, which is why a lot of right wing people are now questioning, because I got to question the Bushes and the right wing is questioning Obama. The right wing is questioning Biden. And we're both like, your politicians are maybe gravy, but ours aren't.
That's the problem, because it's identity politics.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're more open to seeing the other parties' politicians as grapos than we are to see our own.
But the next level is looking at all of it and removing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the self-realization piece. To self-realize isn't to grip onto your identity more. It's to actually let go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so vulnerable and scary to be like, actually, I thought I was right. And I thought I knew all these things. And I'm an activist. And I've already said all these things and written all. I'm just like thinking of other people who are also activists and have made work. But I think something that you have shown me as an artist is like, what it is to make good art and be a real activist is actually to continue questioning yourself and to not be attached to being right, but to put questions forward and to let people be in conversation with like the art that you're making.
Yeah, and it's hard because I personally did campaign for Obama. I went down to Ohio to like get people to vote. I wanted to believe in the depths of my soul that the change he was talking about was legitimate. I really did. It was heartbreaking to realize like, wait, Obama sent more drones in the Middle East than the dude beforehand who I was like actively fighting against. It was heartbreaking. It was like its own humiliation. It was not easy to accept. I get it. I'm not saying like I love feeling this way because it does have that feeling of like being on a sinking ship without a captain. And that is disorienting. It is upsetting.
Because then the politicians can no longer replace God in your heart.
Or your mommy or your daddy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Who will protect us.
Whoever's the savior.
I mean, we want to be protected. So again, what I'm saying is that this has been something that I've been questioning and thinking about for a long time. And a lot of it began in my early 20s. And so this was another story that I wanted to tell you about is I was introduced through these guys who started this, it was a website. This was before YouTube, before any social media, and it was called Guerrilla News Network, GNN. And they wanted to make media for the MTV generation that was edgy, that was not influenced by corporations, and that was like free media supported by the public. Well, free media in the sense that it was free of advertising and that it was like the public supporting it, kind of like a PBS, but online. And the ethos of it was counterculture. It was questioning the official narrative. They were talking about GMOs, early 2000s talking about Monsanto, early 2000s talking about the Catholic Church, early 2000s, like really getting into a lot of stuff that we've come to kind of accept. They were on the fringes of media questioning this. And so these were people that I was interacting with. They were my friends, and they were making, so GNN was making a documentary about this woman. Her name was Kathy O'Brien, and she wrote a book called The Transformation of America. Transformation, like trans. And she was talking about being a mind-controlled sex slave for these political figures. And again, this was under a Republican presidency. She was naming Republican names like Dickie Cheney and George Bush Sr. She was talking about people that I already had a lot of assumptions about. So this was kind of easier for me to get on board. I have to keep saying that, like, I did get on board. I watched Kathy's interviews. I listened to her story. I believed her. And looking up the transformation of America, Kathy O'Brien, I implore you to do some research on this. We can add more information in the show notes, affirmation. So, I mean, like my heart just kind of like listening to these stories is like very upsetting. I'm not gonna say like, oh, you should do this and then like eat a chocolate bar. No, it's
or maybe do for the magnesium.
Yeah, you'll need the dopamine spike. But you know, she's sharing her story about being mind controlled, and she's talking also about like why one would have to be mind controlled and the torture and the trauma and the things that they do in order to investigate, like what is it to compartmentalize a human brain? Like when you put someone through a certain amount of trauma, then how do they become a quote unquote sex slave is because their brain has become so compartmentalized in order to protect themselves from like the horrible events that have happened to them, and then they're easy to control. They can be used. I mean, this is the thing is like obviously with the tapes, that's the thing that keeps coming up. Diddy had tapes. Why would he have tapes of people? They're not just doing these actions, they're taping it, and the taping it is for bribery and for blackmail. So if artists for whatever reason and executives in Hollywood need to bribe and blackmail each other, I would think personally, I'm just like making some mental leaps here that politicians need to bribe and blackmail each other more than anyone else. And that is why the current war efforts are tangential with this story, because any politician that dares go against this current war effort is probably going to be compromised with tapes they have been forced to create or energetically forced to create or culturally forced to create. I think that's the thing. It's like, it's so hard to comprehend because we're like, is everyone just a pedo grabo? What's happening? But I think you can be coerced into a culture.
Yeah.
I mean, we see it with war culture. Think about like these things that people do in war and in violence that like they would not do normally.
And I mean, you always make this point about getting to a certain level of power and like nothing satisfies you and like you're bored and you have access and
You
it's a
live
part of the
above the law.
culture and you live above the law and there's a being a part of it too. Like even I assume when you've achieved a certain level of status, it's like you get into the fraternity or the sorority, and I wouldn't know because I wasn't a part of Greek life, but I assume it's like this in any exclusive elite club where then it's like, oh well, they're doing it, so I have to do it too if I'm going to be a part of it. Because even within that elite space, there's like this micro blackmailing,
Yeah.
not just the macro blackmailing.
And if you study group psychology, there is a contagious effort that happens when you are in groups. Like people know this, understand this, and they study it. And so, I mean, I can tell you another story that I hate admitting, but that I can like have, and I'm not saying that like I would be at a Diddy party and I would participate, but I am saying I understand the consciousness of it because I was once at a party in high school and I was a senior and a freshman girl came and she was kind of like, she was one of the coach's daughters and she was like very confident because she was one of the coach's daughters, so she came into the party like feeling protected and that she belonged at this senior party, and a lot of us were like, oh, what's she doing here, but we were like whatever. But I think because she came with like such confidence, I don't really know the motivation, but one of we were all doing the beer funnel. Is that what it's called, funneling, where you like suck a beer?
I was more of a wino.
Yeah,
A boxed wino.
you put the beer in a thing and then it like pours into your mouth.
Like a beer funnel.
Beer funnel. Okay, I can't remember if that's what it's called.
Yeah.
So everyone was kind of doing that. And one of these guys, one of these senior guys, pissed in a beer bottle.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And he had her like funnel it.
No.
And this is the most horrible thing is that like I think a bunch of us, okay, so what happened is like we kind of knew it was happening and he was a hot guy and I was fucking this guy and I was like, oh, and I like knew it was
the piss
wrong.
guy?
I was fucking piss guy. He was hot. And I am not happy with this story. I'm not like, wow, I love telling this story. Like I tell this story and I want to weep.
Yeah.
And there was another girl, her name was Rachel, goddess bless her. I think like when the piss like started coming down, Rachel was like, no, don't. So like maybe the piss just touched her lips. I'm not sure what happened, but Rachel was the only one who said anything. And it was because this guy was popular. It was because, there was all these things at play so none of us were like a part of the piss. We weren't pissing, but we were complicit to piss.
Yeah.
I was complicit to piss. And I was so, like I definitely pushed that out of my mind. And I remember when that movie Bully came out. Do you remember that documentary Bully? A friend of mine did that movie. He's a great dude. That's a great film. But when Bully came out, I remember I reached out to that girl and I was like, I am so sorry I didn't do anything. And she was super gracious about it, but also like, I don't know. She was gracious about it, but it wasn't even like, I just wanted her to know that I still felt really bad about that. So my point is that like, I get how people could watch horrible things happening. I don't know. I think we all can get it.
I mean,
right?
Anyone watching this acts like they're above seeing oppressive things happen and not intervening. Like, yet again, it's like none of us are above this. Like, we're not above it. And I think that's the thing too. It's so easy to point at these politicians, at these people in Hollywood and separate ourselves from what's happening when we are complicit.
Yeah.
That is my big gripe also, I would say, with like the wokiest wokes and the altiest right is like what I notice as a common theme and trend in these extreme spaces is there is such a separation of like either wanting a savior or finding the problem outside of ourselves. Like we're not a part of it.
Yeah.
And I also think it's so funny you bring up the bully thing because that's something I was thinking about before as like like the way that bullying comes in terms of politics and elections and voting and who are you going to vote for and who are you aligning yourself with, and the way that bullying happens on social media, and then also the way that bullying happens in these grapey spaces. And I mean, Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish are two faces that just like came into my sphere, and how these young people in Hollywood have been bullied and coerced into these positions of incredible extreme vulnerability. And then it makes me want to examine like where does the bully get their power from? A
The
deficit
energy.
of love?
Yeah, the energy. Because, okay, if we're going to go back to the Diddy and the politics, so Ally Carter, who's one of the people who's been talking about this for years, I've been seeing her videos for years. So I mean,
That
I've
light
shown
shift
her,
as you said that
I
was
know.
woo!
I think she's had like 3 TikTok accounts been taken down, but she keeps coming up. She keeps putting herself out there. She was one of the sex trafficked children, and she was like living in the underground cities. This is what she was talking about.
Full
I mean,
body chills.
look her up. You know, you have these with whistleblowers. You have Kathy O'Brien, you have Ally Carter. There's many. Jaguar Wright. There's
Whistleblower is not an alt-right term also. It's like,
no, this is just people who are trying to get information out that other people have a vested interest in not letting
so
get out.
annoying.
So please look up Ally Carter, look her up, listen to her story. I mean, you really have to listen to these people yourself to see what your gut says. But so she talks about being at these Diddy parties and being a quote unquote party favor, and then being in the underground cities. And she does name politicians as well. And the politicians that she's naming, because when she was alive, so when Kathy O'Brien was dealing with this when she was younger, this again, right wing, when Ally Carter was dealing with this was a left wing presidency. So she's naming left wing politicians. And again, it's like, I get why we don't want to believe that. But if we're going to watch these people's stories, or if we're going to allow ourselves to watch these stories, we also have to be open to the systemic violence that by being in power, you are connecting to a industry that has an agenda that is beyond what they want to broadcast to the people.
Like, you can be pro-choice and still be a graybo.
Yeah.
What, like,
Yeah.
but the like expansiveness within yourself that it requires to like put these pieces together it's just like, it requires going into the underworld and coming back. It requires multiple dark nights of the soul. It requires seeing your own darkness and seeing your own complicity and like facing your own demons to acknowledge like demonic behavior. Like, I don't think you can really see all of these different facets and accept how 2 things can be true at once. Like, weather manipulation and climate change. Like, you can't hold these 2 truths at once unless you've held multiple truths within yourself. Like, I just think it's such a strong, the divisiveness and the separation and the like only being able to hold one thing feels like such a reflection of where people are at within their own selves.
Right. And like being able to say, yes, I believe in climate change. Yes, I think pollution is a massive problem. I mean, I don't need to be told pollution is a problem. I would not go behind a car and like give an exhaust pipe head. I don't want my face, with that smoke coming into my lungs. Like, I just need to look at that. I just need to look at a boat farting into the water and be like, that's not good. I don't need anyone to tell me that. Like, that a lot of it actually is common sense, a level of pollution and trash. We just have to look at trash and be like, this is bad. Animals dying, bad. Denying our impact on the environment is like, of course we're impacting the environment. Let's just take politics out of it. For the love of the goddess, our level of pollution is impacting the environment. Let's just call it a day.
And selfishness.
And And the government has been manipulating the weather for decades for their own agenda.
And to
Like,
think that's right wing is so
that's not right wing.
crazy.
It's
That's
literally
so
the
crazy.
government during the Vietnam War, like they were flooding the Ho Chi Minh Trail to try to win the Vietnam War. Like this is a strategy, it's a tactic.
And it's not irresponsible
To talk about
to
it.
point these things out. But that's again why if you're an actual activist, you're gonna have to be edgy. Like no one who is actively transforming and alchemizing culture is having comfortable conversations. Like, I am not even putting myself out on social media in the same way that you are in terms of just speaking these things. Like, you literally have multiple videos about this exactly. And I read those comments and I saw people who were calling you irresponsible.
Oh, I get called irresponsible a lot. Like, how dare you talk about this? You have a responsibility because you have a platform. As if this platform was given to me. As
Right.
if like someone was like, oh, here, Tony, how about we give you a platform? It's like, no, I've been building this platform for decades and I'm talking about what I think is important. And ultimately, questioning the state is what I think is the most important.
How dare you use your platform to not be a mouthpiece?
Yeah, it's interesting how the people that have been angriest at me, I think we actually have more similar political beliefs and values.
Right.
Like, so it's odd, you know? They're like, don't you care about women being raped? I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, of course I do. That's why I'm talking about this. So I don't know. It's so interesting when when we have these kinds of talks because what we're asking each other to do is have an open mind and have an open heart. Again, I'm not saying I am the purveyor of truth. I am just a human being on earth who's been observing politics, for a really long time. And I have a lot of questions. Really, I'm asking questions. That's all I'm really doing. And I'm sharing my analysis. I'm not pretending to know, I'm pretending to try and think. I mean, I am pretending to try and think because who knows if I'm thinking? I'm doing the best I can.
You're asking what extent will people with power go to extract
More
what
power.
they want,
Mhm.
more power, whether it be resources or sex or the pleasure
Mhm.
in quotation marks or bodies. Like,
Yes, that's great. To what extent will people go? And I think the thing that we are seeing and we have seen, and if we were to be honest, because we've looked at history, we've looked at genocides, we've looked at Holocaust, we've looked at things that people have done to each other, people will go pretty far. It's farther than what we could imagine because a lot of us don't think we would ever do that or are not provided with the quote unquote opportunity to do that,
or we haven't examined what's happened to us. Like, my availability to hold multiple truths at once has directly corresponded to me acknowledging the depth of violence and complex trauma that I have lived through, and also the harm that I have caused. Like, it's all of those things.
Yeah.
Being the perpetrated, being the perpetrator.
Yeah.
To then hold how we're being perpetrated collectively and collectively perpetrating.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's like, how do you have hope within that context? How do you have faith within humanity within that context? Because I do think, at least for me personally, a lot of my journey has been shrouded with a deep depression. It's like I have felt lots of pain um, looking at the world in the way that I do. I'm not just like, oh, cool. Oh, anyway, it's like hurt.
And when it takes up a lot of brain space, I mean, we're
It's
kind of
hurt.
constantly talking about this.
However, I believe, truly, I do believe that we have conditioned and programmed each other into this space of materialism, capitalism, racism, misogyny, homophobia, all of these things, these are all programmed, like programs that we can deprogram, that we can untangle. I fully believe people can change. I fully believe that the source of love, empathy, and compassion is the fabric of existence, is the fabric of the universe. However, we have to face the truth in order to move to that space. I mean, I think that's why I keep asking these questions again, not to say like, I'm right and you're wrong. I have no idea. All I know is that like the more we pick at the truth, the more we can transcend and alchemize this energy and actually operate from a place of like genuine love and compassion, acceptance, all of these things that like we know are crucial for survival. But we have to go through the door of our programming and our conditioning. It just, I don't know how to avoid it. I don't know how to avoid the pain.
We can't.
I don't think we can.
I mean, even I feel like when I'm like experiencing orgasm, maybe it's my sexual trauma, maybe this is just how the vulva works, but like there's definitely a moment of like breathing through the pain before the ecstatic pleasure comes. Like I actually remember being so scared of my first orgasm because I was like, this kind of like hurts maybe. You know, this opening up hurts. Like stretching, like we were doing this yesterday in class, like to stretch, to open up more. Like there's a surrendering to sensation, and even like maybe letting go of like what the label has meant in the past. Like maybe pain isn't so bad. Maybe the darkness isn't a problem. Maybe it's just all, I mean, not to get so, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We gotta lean in.
We gotta lean in and
to the crickety crackety uncomfortable spots.
Yeah, and
to the tight hip flexors.
If we're gonna heal, we have to get gnarly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta talk about the things that are like, not to trigger people with that misophonia by retching. And no one likes a retch.
I mean, I think something else you've taught me is also giving people permission to like be mad at you, to not agree with you, to like go through their own process in terms of what you're saying, the choices that you're making, how you're living your life. I'm freshly out of my Saturn return, and I do feel like codependency was like a big lesson on my altar for this lifetime and maybe many lifetimes. And so like that's new for me. I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, you like really just like don't care about what people think. How are you so like bold? And you just like don't give a fuck. I'm like, no, I actually really deeply give a fuck.
I know it's so hard when people are mad at you or why are you saying that? You're like, I don't know, because I want less war. I really can't live with like all these children being targets of violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like caring more about healing than comfort.
Oh, caring more about healing than comfort. I did have to repeat that. That felt very true. That felt like a download from Mother Gaia. Yes, thank you for saying that.
Because like I think comfort has also been defined within a capitalist structure of like fluffy polyester pillows, and
which really hurt my back. If I'm on a couch for too long, my back really hurts.
I mean, you know me, my literal pillow is full of buckwheat holes and it's like 30 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all right, we're welcoming your feedback and your conversation because this is a dialogue. And I'm not saying you have to agree with everything we said or anything we said, but I am interested in you participating in the conversation.
And like making your own art. I'm so sick of people who don't even make their own art, just being boop, deep, blah, blah, blah.
But in a way that is art. The
comment.
Yeah, no, it's like
it's part of the community performance art.
Yeah,
you have less resistance to comments than I do. I'm still working through that.
Yeah,
I'm like, go make some art.
I welcome it. And I think that sometimes, maybe that's someone's expression and that's still a value. I like the conversation.
Yeah.
I just want the conversation to be as open both in the heart and the mind and the genitalia and the anus as possible. Just open your anus to the sun. Let it blossom, because I think then we'll harvest growth.
Yeah. How much more interesting is it for all of us to collectively question all these people in positions of power together? It's so boring to only question
Each other.
And one side. Because I think that's something interesting about our audience as well. It's like some people are like, you're so alt-right. And then other people are like, you're too woke. You know, like we always are in this weird gray space of people not quite
Yeah, because
knowing how
I will
to
question every administration.
Yeah.
I will question every administration because I'm tired of being bullied into the lesser of two evil paradigms.
And like, let's just get it straight. Like, we're not woke or alt-right. We're actually, I would say we're post-woke. I would say the Gnarly Girls podcast is post-woke. I do love postmodern art is like my favorite. We actually just talked about this doing the dishwasher the other day. Like, I actually had to go through wokeness to arrive to this place of post-woke. Like I went through all of it. Like I was raised in a conservative, Christian, weird, Southern, whatever. And I had to go through that shit. And then I had to go through my like anarchist woke awakening. And then I got bullied into voting for Hillary over Bernie, which is still something I'm processing. And then I had to transition and transcend into post woke. And I don't even know what's next. Because I think a lot of people actually, I think a lot of activists and radicals and true leftists are actually in a post woke place. I think there are a lot of people who are asking a lot of questions at once, which are our people, which I think are probably going to be the majority of people who have listened this far in this podcast episode, because everyone else would have gotten so mad or
upset
by now, especially the piss funnel.
The piss funnel was upsetting. I mean, I think when I think about these boxes that we put ourselves in and we put each other in, that's kind of why I always go back to the idea of a spiritual revolution. And a lot of my spiritual practice is rooted in Buddhist philosophy, which is untangling the connection to identity, untangling the connection to separateness, and really seeing the genuine oneness that we're all from the same primordial ooze and the same collective consciousness, and that our desire to separate is like our relationship to our minds and our own egos. And so when we have that voice in your head that's always speaking to you, the voice of your ego, and then you have the voice of the judgment in your head that's judging the voice of the ego, you have these conversations in your mind, and your true wisdom is between the words. It's not what you're saying in your mind. It's not what we're saying to each other. It's in the silence. The wisdom is silence. The wisdom is space. That is where we are all already vibrating on the frequency of like ultimate cosmic knowledge. And it takes discipline to connect to each other in that space. I mean, like, really, our podcast should just be us in silence, making eye contact with the camera for an hour. Like, that's actually a more profound podcast. Maybe not from like an auditory perspective, but actually from an auditory. I think the rest of these podcasts should just be pure silence and connection through a telepathic quantum field. However, I don't know how to monetize that. LOL. Maybe we really could. Maybe we should never speak again. I do understand the vow of silence. Now that's where I'm at, contemplating a vow of silence.
I mean, it's pretty post-woke of you. I also want to contextualize for people that you've done multiple silent Buddhist meditation retreats, like not Vipassanas, like straight up, like no like upper lip cueing, like just some raw dog meditation. And like have healed yourself from pretty intense illnesses, and like you haven't just like gone to hippie festivals and like done mushrooms and now you're like you know what I mean? Because I feel like people say what you just said, but you actually meditate for 20 minutes in silence every morning, and sometimes I join you and sometimes I don't. But I just think like that's something you would never actually say, but I want to tell people that's who you are.
Oh, thank you.
As like a real person.
Yeah.
Like you don't do it for your art. You just like do that for the world, you know?
No, I do that for my own energetic field, to try to really connect everyone.
Which is the world.
Which is the world, yeah. Yeah, so I guess we've gone on and on. I personally might never speak again, but if I do, I hope you will tune into our next podcast, even if this one filled you with confused emotions and potentially rage and resentment. I hope we can work through it for the next one. Thank you for coming.